Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Wednesday, October the 8th. My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico, here in Manchester for the final groggy morning of the entire conference season, only hours before Kemi Badenoch gives an address to delegates that will determine her future one way or another.
And my name is Sam Coates of Sky News. And to be absolutely clear, I'm determined not to be outdone. So I've just landed in Mumbai and I'm in the courtyard of the Taj Mahal Tower Hotel after an overnight flight with Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who is bringing his biggest ever trade delegation to date. In fact, one official told me it's the largest trade delegation in history here to India. But it's incredible. We've just driven through the streets of Mumbai from the airport, and I kid you not, giant pictures of Keir Starmer on every other lamppost along the main motorway into Mumbai. Sky producer Joe Cook thinks he saw thousands of them from the minibus. It was incredible. So take that, Andy Burnham. But despite all of that, it's not plain sailing, well, plain flying. He's actually flying into a bit of a storm as he faces questions about tariffs, treachery, and tax.
First, not jealous at all, she said, waking up early in Deansgate. Well, tariffs, tax, and treachery, it's a potent brew. And on tariffs, that will be a reference to the existential tariff levels the EU has now slapped on our steel industry, prompting warnings the part nationalised industry of steel could even collapse. Treachery, well, that's the ugly blame game between Number 10 and the Crown Prosecution Service, which Keir Starmer used to lead over the trial of two men alleged to have spied for China. Now, tax? Go on.
Well, of course, I've just been on a plane with a huge business delegation who are all here in part to talk to the Prime Minister and his advisors. And they just don't want any more of it, tax, that is, particularly in the November 26th budget. That is the number one ask. No more higher taxes of the business delegation I've been chatting to. I've been going up and down the plane and around the reception rooms of this trip. And they want to deliver that message loud and clear to the Prime Minister and to the Business Secretary, Peter Carl.
Well, more of your globetrotting in just a moment, but to get the earthbound among us underway, as we've done throughout the conference season, whenever there's a leader's speech, we do an extra episode. And Sam, although you're in India, a promise is a promise. So there will be a special Politics at Sam and Anne debrief edition dropping mid-afternoon in your feeds on the Tory leader's crucial speech and our reaction to that. I've no idea whether you're going to be following it from, but I like to think you'll be juggling about 5 screens in a Sam Coates kind of way.
Oh, mere trifles. Let's not worry about that. I'm sure it'll be fine. There'll be a plan. I'm sure there will be. Right. But to tee up the speech in a moment, I'm excited to hear how Kemi Badenoch's number 2, Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride, outlines the big picture goal of her speech. He was speaking to you yesterday at the Politico pub, which is open for business for its final day in Manchester.
Yes, and Mel Stride really had one job, Sam, and that was to tee up Kemi Badenoch's move onto the territory of the economy, growth, prosperity. That is going to be front and centre of her appearance today. But there is competition on that front from the PM, with all those pictures of CEOs, captains of industry, ministers traveling with him. The big, beautiful India trade deal. The difference is, of course, opposition and government. So tell us what's been going on in government.
Well, I can tell you what not only it has been going on, but what it sounded like. Because if you were sitting on that British Airways jet, it sounded a bit like this.
This is the Prime Minister arrived in the cockpit. And a very warm welcome to BA Flight 9100 to Mumbai. It's really fantastic to have you all on board. This is the biggest trade mission to India that the UK has ever sent.
So that was a disembodied voice of the PM. If I was being a little mean, Anne, the announcement reminded me of those AI spoof YouTube Minecraft videos, which have Keir Starmer duking it out with an AI Nigel Farage, which I keep seeing all over social media. But maybe that's just me. If you know, for that kind of stuff. Anyway, this trip isn't standard. It is the largest ever, I'm told, and the CEO names are absolutely stellar. Look, it was a lovely, lovely flight because BA CEO and Chairman Sean Doyle was part of the delegation. as was his Virgin Atlantic rival, who actually promises to review the flight on TV if we can get a camera in front of him. So we're doing that, trying to do that today. You had the bosses from Rolls-Royce and Barclays and Standard Chartered Bank and fintech big cheeses, 125. And it's not only business, but it's also cultural, academic leaders, even one Metro mayor thrown in.
My mind is just wandering to how all of these superstars are fitting in business class, given that the PM's presumably in first in his small group. I mean, is it like for the rest of us when you get on a budget flight and you just have to scramble to see who's going to be in rows for 48C?
You see, that's the thing, Anne. It was rather fascinating because they didn't. Only some of the business delegation actually made it into business class, and the rest, yep, they had to slum it in economy. It was quite funny to watch. I did ask Peter Kyle, who himself was up front, how he felt about some captains of industry at the back of the plane with their plastic trays. And he actually grimaced at me and said something about there being a bonding spirit at the back of the plane. Now, I'm obviously not going to name names about who was where, but this flight was definitely quite the leveler.
Right. Well, once we got through the class wars, the Prime Minister is on this trip to build the trade deal that he announced in May with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who he is meeting tomorrow. I gather the deals of that are still being worked out, but that doesn't mean that the work of linking the two countries more closely can't start sooner, Sam. And I assume that there is a lot of work and symbolism going into that where you are.
Oh, that's exactly right. Look, by and large, people are pretty enthusiastic about this trip. I've talked to several of them in the last few hours, and they like the idea of the Prime Minister being a visible spearhead for business overseas. That's something that some of them have long wanted and were frustrated that Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson didn't do more of. But I have to say the mood of the business delegation is a little bit more nuanced than that. There's not one mood, there never is with a large group of people, but there is, and there were in the last 24 hours, pockets of grumpiness about, well, apart from anything else, about how Number 10 set all of this up. They moved the dates around at the last moment. You know, it was meant to be Monday to Thursday, and then last week it was Tuesday to Fridays. And CEO diaries just don't switch that easily. And this hurt everybody's head. It actually clashes with another UK investment event that was in Scotland on Monday and Tuesday. So, you know, why is the UK doing two investment events at the same time? That people didn't really understand that. And then the trip was actually shortened suddenly at the last moment. It was meant to be to Bangalore as well. That's not now happening. So the substance is less than originally billed. One of the CEOs said to me that he's going because if you get an offer from the PM, you really pretty much have to go. They didn't actually have a great deal of business in India, and they're going to go off on Thursday and do some other work. One final thing, I'd say most of them are aware that while it's important, what matters most is the budget. So wherever they can, what this really is an opportunity to lobby, to make sure that your face is known to the people at the top of the tree, so that when you want to land a point in public, they know to listen. So that is the point. That is why you're paying the oftentimes tens of thousands of pounds to go in this on this trade trip. And the issue that is concerning them is just how the government deals with the 20 to 30 billion pound black hole that listeners to this podcast will be very familiar with, because they think it's going to hurt. And you know, if there are banks on this trip, they're worried about bank taxes, and so on and so on. So it is a way of businesses exercising some soft power as well.
Really intrigued by that because, of course, the front of house story is you take along these business leaders, they're really happy to be there, and it directly helps them and other businesses downstream of that. You make it sound a bit like it's a kind of flying lobbying exercise by UK PLC, particularly around the black hole. That's just a different way of looking at it. And it's a fascinating trip in so many ways, principally because, from my point of view, as a sort of geopolitics lens on this, there isn't alignment between the business aim of this jaunt and the outlook of the two principals on some quite fundamental things. Exhibit A, we've had Narendra Modi telephoning in the last couple of days with President Putin to wish him happy birthday and warmly congratulating the Russian dictator on his 73rd birthday and conveying wishes for his success in all his endeavors. Well, all of those endeavors pointedly include the war in Ukraine. I would describe that as awkward. How's that been?
Oh God, yes. I mean, remember It was Donald Trump who actually ratcheted tariffs up on India very recently because he said India was buying Russian oil, which was funding the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And now here turns up Keir Starmer, fulfilling a promise, I think, to Narendra Modi to come pretty soon. We did actually ask, because we had these huddles on a plane where journalists are allowed to ask the Prime Minister one question each. And someone asked about, isn't it awkward that this call took place, and wished him happy birthday, and said, look, what leverage do you, Prime Minister, have with Narendra Modi during this visit? What can you say to him about, maybe doing more to stand up for Ukraine rather than just buying Russian gas? He actually sidestepped the question. He said that Britain was leading the way in attacking the shadow fleet, the tankers that smuggle gas and oil from Russia, but didn't directly engage with that question. So yeah, that was and is one of the big picture complications of this trip. But you think there's another angle?
Yes, I do. And breaking just as you were taking off, Sam, two trade and diplomacy stories with British industry at their heart. First, the announcement that the EU is going to slap massive tariffs on steel, tit for tat retaliation for those Trump levies. But of course, massive impacts for the British steel industry too, facing the biggest crisis in its history after the European Union said it had no choice but to reduce our quota with 50% tariffs there. Now, the UK exports 78% of its steel to the EU, which I think we sometimes forget because we've been so focused on the US. And the industry is issuing stark warnings that this could decimate the UK's manufacturing base, already, of course, hit by those tariffs from Washington and from a global oversupply, not least actually from where you are. Better news, however, in Playbook today on the pharmaceutical industry. In a scoop by my colleagues Dan Bloom and Caroline Hoog, the UK has drawn up proposals to raise the amount the NHS is prepared to pay for pharmaceutical, known as pharma, firms for drugs after months of talks and standoffs with the Trump administration. And what this political story, is saying that UK officials have briefed the US on new proposals to basically to kind of get out of this stalemate. And they are set to have deeper discussions with the sector in the coming days. It's all complex stuff when it comes to pharmaceuticals and trade, but there has been no movement on this. We can't count chickens before they're hatched, but it would appear that this is now happening as what looks like a more final stage negotiation. That would be a big deal for the NHS, but it will also mean that the NHS is probably going to have to pay more for medicines overall. So watch that one. You've got the business secretary with you, Sam. Go and have a chat with him about it.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fascinating. If drugs are going to cost the NHS more, and I bet you the Treasury is not going to give them any more money, it means presumably that there are going to be less drugs available to go around. So that could actually turn into quite a significant story. And you do just get the sense that there's a lot going on all over the place. That this trip is primarily about boosting trade and reducing barriers, but it really is one of our closest allies, the EU, that is making a big strategically important kind of trade announcement at this point, thousands of miles away from Mumbai, where I am at the moment. And it does feel like it has the potential to decimate the strategically important UK steel industry, which already needs a decent whack of taxpayer support, not least because of the part taxpayer ownership of the Scunthorpe plant. And the reason that the EU is doing this is because they've been whacked by Trump tariffs. All of this contributes to that feeling that we're just occasionally a sort of bit part player, a sort of bystander who gets caught in the slipstream of the arguments between bigger blocs. And it does feel like the EU have taken quite a tough position against the UK. A bit of me wonders whether this is a bit of a proper punishment for being outside the EU customs union. We asked Keir Starmer on the plane about these EU steel tariffs, and he said, look, we're talking to the EU, we're actually talking to the US too, but I'm not going to tell you anything more. So it's going to be a painful autumn for that sector. But also, that's a pretty grim backdrop for the Nick Thomas-Symonds negotiation with the EU that he's got to finalise over this autumn. Things like youth mobility and all the rest of it still on the table. So that just doesn't feel great. Right, that's enough of the business here in Mumbai and on trade. Let's return the focus of this podcast to Manchester. Kemi Badenoch speaks at 11, and you've been sucking up the mood, downing the mood for the last 24 hours. What is it, and what are we expecting in a few hours' time?
Well, Kemi Badenoch will make one big promise to cut government spending to balance the books as she seeks to restore the Conservatives' reputation for economic credibility. She is going to talk about a new golden rule. Yes, it's one of those, Sam, that the Tories will promise that at least half of anything saved through spending cuts will go towards reducing government borrowing. So a stringent message there, and that stands at about 84 billion a year, so substantial. She will then signal a desire to use other savings to reduce the taxes stifling our economy. We are waiting for some form of tax stuffed rabbit to emerge from the Badenoch hat this morning in terms of what she's really going to say about taxes, because it doesn't feel that you can just sell cuts as the glad, confident message to send the Tory party home. I sat down yesterday with Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor. He spent months helping Kemi Badenoch draft what's essentially a big pivot onto the economy, is something that she wants to put front and centre of her leadership. And she is, of course, still fighting to show that she can hold on to that, given the polling situation of her party. And here's what Mel Stride said.
Firstly, we have put to one side this idea that nobody knows what the Conservative Party stands for, we don't have any policies, and so on and so forth. And I think we've done that certainly in terms of net migration and legal migration and the announcements around the ECHR withdrawal, for example. And I think we've very solidly done it in terms of the economy, where I, in my speech yesterday, staked out clear blue water between us and the other parties in terms of fiscal responsibility, living within our means, demonstrating how we can control spending in order both to get down the debt that is spiraling out of control, but equally to take important decisions that are about driving growth.
And the point to me, Sam, is that this isn't just any set of Tory pledges to be sensible stewards of the UK economy we might expect. It is attempted to be a moment when we look at the party, or voters look at the party in a different light, and they begin to make comparisons, perhaps particularly with reform, where there are confusing messages about how Nigel Farage and co would manage the economy. But you know what it's like at conference, Sam, if you haven't forgotten being here, because you're just somewhere a lot more exciting. But here there is still a lot of concern among Kemi Badenoch loyalists, and perhaps a slightly sickly excitement among her detractors. You still had Robert Jenrick walking around here, came into the Politico pub yesterday, absolutely surrounded by journalists looking for his every mood. Is he or is he not going to drop some hint about a leadership challenge? And even if not now, well, maybe in November, maybe as we look towards the next months for the Conservatives. He had given those rather salty comments, or rather they were leaked, about a visit to Handsworth a few months ago to Birmingham, and he spoke, and we talked about it on the podcast, about not seeing a white face in the street. Well, we knew that yesterday. So I asked Mel Stride about it, and here's what he said very briefly.
I think everybody chooses their own words, and I'll be frank and say that they're not words that I would have chosen. So I'm not going to get sort of drawn into sort of a micro little examination of this whole area, but just to say that, I think, everybody chooses their own words, and that's fine, and that's absolutely right, and everybody has their own style and tone.
I mean, it speaks for itself. It was just clearly a dividing line, but no, the Shadow Chancellor was not going to say my colleague was misunderstood, etc., etc. Yet everywhere here, Sam, there's arguments about tone, about where the party should be, about its positioning. My guess is Kemi Badenoch will try to ride that out today and say, no, what really matters is pounds, shillings, as they no longer are, and pence. And that is where people will want the Conservative Party to make its comeback.
Right, well, we'll find out later because the speech is imminent. That's at 11. So about mid-afternoon, we will get the debrief edition into the podcast feed, so you can get that wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back later, but 4,600 miles apart, and absence, I'm sure, makes the heart go fonder. So I will see you later.
I am pining, Sam. See you later after that big speech by the Tory leader.